Series 1, The Backwater. The door closed with a quiet, final click, like a verdict. Kostya leaned against the doorframe, unable to take another step into his own apartment. The tick-tock of the grandfather clock marked the seconds of his life. Even, empty, meaningless. Today had been the last straw. Another failed project, the reproachful look from his boss. He looked around, the clean lines of the modern renovation, the designer's sofa. None of it was his. It was a beautiful shell, a cage. His gaze fell on his reflection in the dark TV screen. 35 years old, already graying at the temples. And what do you have to show for it, Kostya? A mortgage, a job that sucks your soul dry? He walked to the window. The evening metropolis buzzed below, and he understood with frightening clarity. He couldn't do it anymore. He was jaded, disillusioned with everything. A burning, physical desire to run tightened his throat. To leave. Far away. As if in a trance, he sat down at the computer. His fingers typed into the search bar. Cheap houses in remote Siberian villages. He scrolled through listings until his eyes caught one. House for sale. Village of Omut. Edge of the taiga. Very cheap. The photo showed a tiny, time-blackened cabin, and behind it, a wall of mighty, snow-covered fir trees. Omut, a remote, absorbing place. Perfect. A quiet, elderly voice answered his call. There was no haggling. A week later, having sold almost everything he owned, Kostya was on a rickety bus leaving the city, with just one backpack and a suitcase. The bus, puffing diesel exhaust, turned around and drove back, leaving Kostya alone on a deserted, snow-covered road. The only sign of civilization was a rusty bus stop with a caved-in roof. Well, that's it. I'm here. But there's no village, he thought with a sudden panic. Suddenly, he caught movement. A prehistoric UAZ Bukanka van slowly crawled from around the bend. The driver was a stocky man in an old quilted jacket. Where you headed? To the village. Omut, Kostya replied. The man sighed heavily. Get in. I'll give you a lift. The UAZ started, bouncing over the potholes. Why do you want to go to Omut? The places here are remote, not for outsiders. Just tired of the city, Kostya replied evasively. The city, at least there are people there. Here, there are different laws. They don't like strangers here. What does he mean? Village xenophobia. Rumors are going around. They say the folks there are different. They don't age, don't get sick, and no one ever leaves. Never. You come here or are born here. That's where you lay your bones. Or you don't. Maybe you should turn back. No, Kostya answered too sharply. Thank you, but I've made up my mind. Rumors. Nonsense. I didn't leave everything behind just to be scared by the first tall tale. The driver sighed heavily and didn't say another word. The village of Omut greeted him with an oppressive, absolute silence. A few dozen log houses, blackened by time, stood along a single street. No signs of civilization, just smoke from the chimneys. The silence was deafening. The key, left under the mat on the porch, turned with a screech in the lock, and the heavy oak door gave way with difficulty, letting him inside. The first breath hit his lungs not with a smell, but with a freezing, stale cold. The air inside was noticeably colder than outside. God, it's like a fridge in here. Worse. I hope the stove works, or I'll freeze to death, a panicked thought flashed through Kostya's mind. He dropped his backpack on the table and, rubbing his numb fingers, started looking for firewood. The main room was empty. Okay, calm down. Panic won't help. Need to think. Where would they even keep firewood here? Despair began to creep up his throat. His gaze fell on a second, lower door in the corner, behind the stove. He pushed it. The door, swollen from dampness, gave way with a creak. A storage room. Makes sense. There must be something in there. The cold here was even fiercer, but his attention was immediately drawn to something else. A neat stack of firewood. Well, would you look at that? Real treasure. The gold reserve. He laughed inwardly with relief. Thank you, anonymous previous owner. You saved me. He gathered an armful of logs and returned to the main room, closing the door behind him. All right, theory is clear. Small kindling at the bottom, bigger logs on top, need air. Now Professor Kostya will conduct an experiment in making fire. He opened the heavy cast-iron stove door. It was dark inside, smelling of cold soot. Some fireplace. I'll have to clean it later. The first attempt ended in nothing. The birch bark just charred and went out. Of course, it can't be that simple. There are always complications. The second attempt, too. Burn, damn you, he cursed mentally, feeling the cold starting to win again. Can't I even light a fire? Total failure. He remembered the air vent, opened the small door at the bottom of the stove, struck the lighter again. This time, a thin splinter caught greedily, followed by birch bark igniting with a merry crackle. It worked. Damn, it worked. He almost jumped for joy from a sudden childlike glee. I made fire. He added more splinters, then carefully added smaller logs, watching enchanted as the fire hummed and gained strength. So beautiful. Better than any TV. Hypnotic. No thoughts, just fire. He closed the stove door, leaving it slightly ajar, and crouched before the stove, stretching his frozen hands toward the flames. The first, precious warmth beat against his palms. There it is. Real, honest warmth. Not from a radiator someone turned on far away, but something you made yourself. Feel the difference, Kostya. Do you feel it? He couldn't look away from the burning logs. The cold inside the cabin began to slowly retreat. Managed, didn't freeze, survived the first day. Now I can make some tea. King of the wild, yeah, right, he smirked to himself. But there was pride and a drop of hope in that smirk. The night was restless. He imagined footsteps and sounds, but now, in the cold morning light, everything seemed mundane. The stove had cooled, and the cabin was chilly again. Well, day 2. Survived. Now I need to start living, Kostya thought, reluctantly climbing out of his warm sleeping bag. Jatu. Episode 2. Oddities and Signs. First thing, light the stove again. This time it went faster. He was already getting the hang of it. While the water in the cast-iron pot boiled, he finally examined the house properly in the daylight. Sunbeams falling at an angle picked out details from the gloom. The walls of thick, dark logs were covered in a web of cracks. Thick, dust-gray cobwebs hung in the corners, and dried bunches of herbs dangled from the ceiling beams. He noticed a strange symbol carved into the doorframe, an intertwining of branches with an eye in the center. I wonder what that means. On the wall next to the stove hung an icon of a saint, blackened by soot and time. After breakfast, he went out onto the porch to get a better look at the village in the daylight. But first, he decided to inspect his own property. The backyard was larger than he'd expected. It ran right into the wall of the taiga. The snow here was pristine, deep, and only one packed-down path led from the porch to 2 outbuildings. Closer to the forest stood a banya. It was low and blackened by time. The window was tiny, covered with a murky film. The door was warped from dampness. Kostya went closer and peered inside. It smelled of damp wood, ash, and bath whisks. I'll have to fix it up. The banya is sacred. Especially here, he thought with enthusiasm. Next to it, under a low lean-to, was a shed. It was more solid. The door, though ancient, was strong. Inside, it was dim and smelled of dust and old wood. A shaft of light revealed forgotten tools, a hide scraper, a dull saw, several rusty traps. In the corner lay a rough homemade rake and old rotten harness. A legacy of a past life. A real one, Kostya thought with a slight shudder. It was here that he found that heavy, blunt axe. The main task of the day was to gather and stockpile firewood. He chose a spot between the banya and the shed to work. The work began. The monotonous thud of the axe violated the ringing silence. Here it is, the real fitness app. Taiga CrossFit. No subscription, with a guaranteed result, either warmth or death, he quipped to himself, struggling to split another stubborn log. But with each new piece, neatly stacked in the woodpile, he felt a stupid primal pride. After several hours of work, having settled in a bit, he ventured out to meet the residents. He walked along the street, trying to look friendly. Near one of the houses, he saw an old man mending a wattle fence. "Hello," Kostya called out. "I'm new. Arrived yesterday, in the last house." The old man slowly raised his eyes to him. His gaze was empty, detached. "Hello," the old man replied hollowly, and immediately returned to his work. Well, at least he answered, didn't scream or run away. That's progress, Kostya tried to comfort himself. By the well, he saw a woman in her 50s drawing water. She carried 2 full buckets without a yoke, easily and confidently. "Good afternoon," Kostya tried again. The woman shuddered violently. She threw a frightened, almost panicked look at him, grabbed the buckets, and without a word, almost ran to her house. What the hell? Am I a leper? Bewilderment and annoyance boiled inside him. He noticed other oddities. His neighbor, an ancient, stooped old man he'd seen during the day, barely moving around his yard with a stick, appeared again closer to evening. And now, with unexpected, lightning-fast agility, he hoisted a heavy bundle of brushwood onto his shoulder and carried it to the shed with a quick, confident stride, as if the night, or just the evening, gave them strength. In the evening, tired physically and mentally, he sat by the stove. His routine was slowly establishing itself. His whole body ached from the unfamiliar labor. The banya. I need the banya. Now or never, Kostya decided. He went into the storage room and took an armful of firewood. The night was starless and dark. Inside the banya, it smelled of mice, old wood, and ash. He found matches by touch and struck one. Heating the banya proved no less challenging than the stove in the house. He fussed for a long time, blowing on the smoldering chips. Waiting for the banya to heat up, he sat on a cold bench in the dressing room and looked through the small, frost-encrusted window into the black void of the taiga. It was strange and a bit eerie. Finally, it was hot enough inside. He went in, splashed water on the hot stones. Hissing steam with a thick, coniferous scent hit his face. He took a deep breath and climbed onto the top shelf. The hot steam enveloped him, penetrating every pore, washing the fatigue and tension from his muscles. He just lay there with his eyes closed, listening to his own heartbeat. He came out of the banya onto the porch, all red and steamed, and delightfully plunged his hands into a prepared bucket of snow. His body hummed from the heat and the subsequent sharp cold. He looked at the black silhouette of his izba and felt a strange calm, an almost homely feeling. Returning to the house along the cold path, clean and renewed, he felt he had taken a step closer to this place. The banya, like an ancient ritual, had accepted him. Falling asleep that evening, he didn't feel the loneliness so acutely. The house creaked around him, But now those sounds seemed not hostile, but simply familiar. The second day ended not with anxiety, but with a tired, pure satisfaction. Tomorrow would be a new day, new work, and the supply truck. He was ready for a new day in Omut. Day 3. The roar of the Bukanka's engine cut through Omut's morning silence. Kostya, who had already begun to get used to the oppressive quiet, rushed outside. The same UAZ was slowly crawling down the road, pushing through the beginning ground blizzard. The driver, the same grim man, got out, lit a cigarette, not looking around. And then, as if from underground, they appeared. The residents. Silently, with bags and baskets, they formed a queue. No talk, no laughter. Just the squeak of snow under felt boots and rare monosyllabic requests like flour, salt, and matches. As Kostya walked to the truck, his gaze caught on details. On some of the houses, he noticed strange symbols, not just carved window frames, but specific symbols burned or carved into door frames or shutters. Intertwining branches, similar to the one in his house. Spirals resembling frozen whirlpools. Stylized depictions of eyes. They were old, smoothed by time, but clearly made with intent. For you, I see you need supplies too. Missed civilization, the driver rasped, handing Kostya a pack of cigarettes. Kostya nodded and took it. Thank you. Tell me, do you come here often? Every 2 weeks, like clockwork. They don't need more. The driver glanced at the silent old people. Just the bare necessities. And why are they so quiet? Kostya couldn't help but ask. The driver frowned. Places like this, the taiga is silent and the people match. They don't like extra words and extra eyes. He looked intently at Kostya. You didn't listen to my advice. Well, it's your lookout. The driver was already turning to leave, but Kostya called out to him. Listen, next time, could you bring something from the city for me? I left some things at the station, in the left luggage. Clothes, books. The driver was silent for a moment, looking him over appraisingly. All right, write a list and the locker number. No money needed. Just make sure there's nothing extra. Kostya hastily scribbled a list and shoved the paper at the driver. Thank you so much. Told you, no need for extra eyes here, the driver grumbled grimly. And now you want your things brought in. Settling in then. He shook his head with an unreadable expression, a mix of pity and reproach. Your stuff will be here in 2 weeks, if, of course, you haven't changed your mind by then. Returning to his house, Kostya saw his neighbor, the ancient old man. He was clearing snow from his porch. Seeing Kostya with a bag, he stopped for a moment. Their eyes met. And then the old man, looking around, shook his head almost imperceptibly. Not quite in reproach, not quite in pity. Then he went back to work. That evening, unpacking the groceries, he found a parcel at the bottom of the bag that he hadn't ordered. It contained a large piece of old, yellowed sallow and several dried fish. No note, nothing. Who was it from? The driver? Or him? Day 4. Kostya woke to a ringing silence. He went to the window and gasped. The great snow had begun in earnest. Visibility was zero. A white haze had swallowed the taiga, the neighboring houses, the sky. The world had shrunk to the size of his izba. There it is. The roads will definitely be blocked. Now I'm here for the long haul, he thought with a strange calm. Days 5 through 10 blurred into one long, monotonous tapestry. The great snow would sometimes abate, turning into a fine ground blizzard, then rage with renewed force. Kostya fell into a routine. Stove, firewood, meager food. The crushing loneliness of the first days gradually gave way to a strange tranquility. He continued to observe his neighbors. Their life seemed just as measured and silent. They only came out when necessary, and always with that same inexplicable strength and agility. Day 11. The supply of firewood in the storage room was running low. Picking at the ice in the corner with his knife, Kostya found a board under the last log, blackened and almost blending with the earth. He cleared it of ice. It was square and clearly served as a hatch. His heart beat faster. He pried the board up with his knife. It gave way with a creak, revealing a narrow opening to a cellar, from which wafted a smell of dampness, dust, and centuries-old must. With a flashlight in his trembling hand, he climbed down. It was dark below. On the wall by the entrance, he noticed an old candle inserted into a homemade horn candlestick. Striking a match, he lit it. The wick crackled, and a steady, living light wavered in the darkness. The cellar wasn't deep, but it was spacious, and it was full. The whole room was covered in a thick layer of dust. In the corner stood birch bark containers. On the shelves lay bundles of dried herbs, bunches of shriveled roots. But the most interesting things hung on the walls. Ritual masks, carved from dark wood, covered in cobwebs. One with a long beak and empty eye sockets, another with deer antlers, a third with a bear's snarl. Their empty eyes watched Kostya through the veil of time. Next to them hung garments of rough cloth, embroidered with faded beads and symbols identical to those on the houses. On a table lay objects, a dark wooden bowl, a knife with a yellowed bone handle, a small drum, and in the center of it all, on an altar made of a flat stone, lay a stack of tattered, crumbling sheets, covered in the same mysterious script he'd seen on his doorframe. Kostya reverently picked up one sheet, blowing the centuries-old dust from it. He ran his finger over the rough paper. What is written here? He couldn't read it, but the connection between these texts, the strange artifacts, and his non-aging neighbors was obvious. This was the key. Day 12. Going out for firewood, Kostya saw that his neighbor couldn't open his woodshed. The door was frozen shut. The old man pushed at it weakly, looking frail and helpless. Without thinking, Kostya approached. "Let me help." He took a crowbar, pried the door, and yanked it open. There was a cracking sound, and the door gave way. The old man looked at him. In his eyes was gratitude mixed with pity. "Thank you, son. The strength isn't what it used to be. It was a lie, and both of them knew it." From that moment, something changed. The neighbors' gaze when they met became less detached. Soon, Kostya began to notice something alarming. His neighbor stumbled on flat ground. The old woman from across the way dropped a bucket of water. Another old man, chopping wood, took long pauses to catch his breath. They seemed to be losing their strength. Their movements became slightly more stiff, and along with the fading strength, a shadow of anxiety appeared in their eyes. One evening, coming out of the banya, Kostya saw a clay pot with pickles, cucumbers, and soaked apples on his porch. A simple but clear sign of acceptance. Day 13. Kostya helped his neighbor clear snow again. The old man silently nodded and waved his hand toward his house. "Come in, warm up. We'll have some tea." Inside, it smelled of dried herbs and baked bread. The old man, he introduced himself as Aristarch, silently poured tea into 2 rough mugs. Tired, Kostya answered honestly to the question about why he'd moved. Of the hustle, the emptiness. "I was looking for something real." Aristarch looked at him carefully and nodded. "Aristarch Matvievich, your village, it's special. The people here are different. The places here are special. The taiga, it changes people, breaks some, strengthens others. But I saw how you handle logs. That's not how old men move." Aristarch smirked into his mustache. Old age, it's not just weakness. There's another kind of strength. From the earth, from the forest. You're a city boy. You wouldn't understand. While Aristarch was refilling the tea, Kostya's gaze fell on a shelf with books. Among the worn volumes, he saw several old scuffed books in dark leather bindings. They looked painfully familiar. Interesting books you have. Old stuff. My grandfather's. Local tales and legends. Do you like stories, Kostya? Very much. Aristarch took one of the books from the shelf, the thinnest one, and handed it to Kostya. Here, read it in your spare time. About our region. Maybe you'll understand better where you've ended up. Evening of the 13th day. Kostya sat down by the stove with the book. The binding was cracked, the pages fragile. He opened it carefully. Inside were those same symbols, but with inserted pages of translation into Russian, written in an elderly hand. Tales of the spirits of the taiga. He found one of the tales and began to read. The tale of the giver and the keeper. And the people turned to he who is in the roots and called out, "We are cold and hungry. Our strength melts like spring snow. Do not let us sink into timelessness." And an answer came without words. "You will take and you will be strong, but you will give in return what is pledged. Honor the silence in which I dwell. Honor the cycle. Bring offerings from the heart, not from fear. Appear when the night light is full, and reaffirm your loyalty. Live in harmony with the thicket, and it will nourish you. Turn away, and the connection will break, leaving you empty shells." And the people agreed, and the strength of the earth flowed into them, and they became different, resilient, ageless guardians. But nothing is given for free, and everything has its price. Kostya looked up from the book, stunned. He rushed to the cellar and began running his finger over the symbols on the walls, comparing them to those in the book. Everything matched. The intertwined branches, the sacred thicket, the spiral, the gift and the offering, the closed circle loyalty and the cycle. Omut was a village of guardians of an ancient pact. Their strength was payment for devotion and rituals. Their weakness meant the pact had been broken. He sat on the cold earth of the cellar, the book on his knees, and understood he had touched the secret. He had found the key. Day 14. Morning. Kostya woke not to an aching silence, but to a thick, biting cold that had crept into the house overnight. The stove had long gone out, and the air inside was searingly icy, smelling of cooled ash and the frosty, resinous scent of pine needles seeping through cracks in the walls. He didn't open his eyes immediately, lying in his sleeping bag and watching his own breath plume in the semi-darkness like a pale, disembodied ghost. His thoughts flowed lazily, thickly like sap. 13 days. Only 13 days ago he was sitting in his sterile apartment, listening to the clock tick away the emptiness. Now that emptiness was outside, vast, white, silent, but it wasn't inside him anymore. Inside was crowded with thoughts, images, riddles. The masks in the cellar, the old book. The words about he who is in the roots buzzed in his head like trapped flies. Reluctantly, overcoming the powerful temptation to stay in the warm shell of his sleeping bag, he got out. The cold instantly seized his bare ankles and began deftly crawling up his body. He rubbed his palms, snorting, and began the now familiar ritual lighting the stove. His movements were precise, almost mechanical, a skill earned in 2 weeks of fighting for warmth. Chips, birch bark, a careful flame humming in the stove's belly. He was no longer afraid of the fire. He negotiated with it. And today the fire caught on the first match, as if eager to warm him. While the water in the cast-iron pot boiled, he went to the frost-encrusted window and wiped the glass with his palm. and froze. The great snow had finally subsided. The taiga lay before him in all its dazzling silent power. White, heavy caps on ancient firs and spruces bent the branches to the ground. The endless sea of taiga stretched to the horizon, rolling with snowy peaks and hollows. The air was so clean and transparent, it seemed he could touch the top of a pine tree on a cliff 2 kilometers away. The sky had cleared to an icy blue, and the weak, low winter sun cast long, sharp shadows on the snow, sprinkling it with myriad diamond sparks. And across this sparkling whiteness, violating the usual oppressive silence, people were moving. Not 2 or 3 silent old people puttering in their yards, but many people. 10, 15, 20. Men, women, even a few children. They walked unhurriedly but purposefully, all in one direction deeper into the village, toward the oldest, blackened house, with a huge, once carved, now almost rotten ridgepole on its roof. They carried birch bark containers, clay jugs, bundles wrapped in rough cloth. Their faces were focused, but not grim. On the contrary, their movements held an unusual lightness, even animation. And a hum carried through the air, not loud but dense, saturated. A hum of muffled voices merging into a single stream, occasionally interrupted by the clear, ringing laughter of a child and the measured, deep chime as if polished stones or wooden clappers were striking together. Kostya's eyes widened in disbelief. This was so unlike the deathly, suspicious village he had known all these days. This was alive. I was looking for something real, flashed through his mind with piercing clarity. Here it is. It's not just in the silence and cold. It's in this. He remembered his old view from the window concrete boxes, billboards, people forever running somewhere. The hustle that he thought was life. Now that life seemed like a fake, cardboard set. And this was the real play, performed according to some ancient, unknown laws. The aroma of brewing tea snapped him out of his stupor. He poured himself a mug, clenched it in his palms, feeling the heat penetrate his frozen fingers. He drank his tea, unable to tear his eyes from the window, watching as the last of the residents disappeared into the doorway of that distant house. Silence gradually returned to the street, but now it was different. Saturated with the echo of recently faded footsteps and voices, ringing with expectation. He finished his tea. His hand trembled slightly, but no longer from the cold. Questions burned inside him, outweighing caution. This was stronger than him. Stronger than the fear of seeming like an outsider, of violating unknown rules. He pushed the mug away sharply. His movements were decisive, almost impetuous. He pulled on his quilted jacket, hat, fur mittens not for long work, but as armor before stepping into a new, unexplored world. He wouldn't sit by the window like a ghost, observing life from the sidelines. He had come here for something real. And here it was, happening right now, outside his door. Kostya swung open the heavy oak door, and the bright winter light hit his face. The frosty air burned his lungs. He took a step onto the porch, then another onto the packed path leading to the street. He walked toward the hum of voices, toward the tracks in the fresh snow, toward the mystery that had finally shown him its living face. He was no longer a runaway. He was a seeker. And he was going to find out what was happening in his village. Kostya stepped outside and was immediately enveloped by a sense of change. The air was festively thick, smelling of stove smoke and something sweetish, spicy, perhaps mead, or a herbal infusion. And although there was no bright light, only dim glows from windows and the pale light of the moon on the snow, the village seemed alive. And the signs. He'd noticed them before, but now they stood out everywhere, as if emerging from the darkness. Not glowing, but seeming deeper, more expressive in this nocturnal half-light. The carved spirals on the window frames, the interwoven branches with an eye in the center on the gates, the strange zigzags on the shutters. All of it now seemed not just decoration, but an important part of what was happening, an ancient language the village had suddenly begun to speak. He was led by sound. Quiet but persistent music, a rhythmic tapping of wooden sticks, the muffled strumming of strings from something like gusli, but more primitive, and the thin, whistling melody of a pipe. The sound came from somewhere in the center of the village. Kostya walked, peering into the shadows, and suddenly stopped. He hadn't noticed this building before. It stood at the very end of the street, partially hidden by sprawling fir trees. A long, low house made of massive, time-blackened logs, more like a temple or a communal house. And its walls, from foundation to roof, were completely covered in carvings. The same symbols as on the houses, but here they were larger, more complex, intertwining into intricate patterns, telling some unknown story. Around this building, illuminated by glimpses from the wide open door, crowds of people gathered. All the residents of Omut. They stood in small groups, talking quietly, some swaying to the music, a couple of elderly women dancing smoothly with each other, almost without moving from the spot. Their faces were animated, smiling, but without rowdy merriment. This was a deep, calm, internal joy. Kostya saw the familiar old woman who had once run from him at the well. Now she was sitting on a snow-covered log pile near the entrance to the large building, wrapped in a shawl, watching the proceedings with a quiet, approving expression. Determination flared in him again. He approached, trying to appear calm. "Hello," he began. "Excuse me for interrupting. Can you tell me what holiday this is? It's all very beautiful." The old woman slowly turned her gaze to him. Her eyes were clear and calm. "Holiday," she repeated, and a light, kind chuckle sounded in her voice. "What holiday, dear? It's just such a day. The old and the young have gathered to warm up and listen. Winter business." She paused, studying his face. "You shouldn't be catching a chill out here, my dear. Go on home, get some sleep. The frost is getting stronger. You've had your stroll." Her words were soft, even caring, but they held an impenetrable firmness. It wasn't a rude refusal, but rather a polite, brook-no-argument indication of his place. Here and now, he was superfluous. Nodding, Kostya retreated. He stood for a while longer on the edge, watching the people communicate, move in time to the music, absolutely ignoring his presence. Then he turned and trudged back to his izba. Entering inside, he didn't turn on the light. He went to the window, moved the edge of the curtain aside. From here, the music was almost inaudible, only the muffled hum of voices sometimes carried on gusts of wind. The shadows of people moved in the glows from the main house. He stood and watched, feeling like a boy with his nose pressed to the window of a candy store, behind which something magical and inaccessible was happening. Weariness, cold, and the bitterness of alienation slowly overwhelmed him. Without even making it to the bed, he sank to the floor by the window, leaned his back against the cold logs, and fell into a heavy, restless sleep full of images of silent dances, stern carved faces, and quiet, mysterious smiles. Kostya jolted awake and opened his eyes. The dream evaporated, leaving behind an aching feeling of the unknown and a burning need to understand. He could no longer lie there and guess. Without thinking, he pulled on his quilted jacket, hat, and went out into the night. The air hit his face with a prickly, burning cold. The streets were deserted and silent. The snow crunched underfoot, and the sound seemed incredibly loud in the absolute stillness. He walked toward that same large house on the outskirts, the one covered in carved signs. His footsteps were the only violation of this silence. Suddenly, on the edge of a clearing, illuminated by the full, almost unnaturally bright moon, a shadow flickered. Not white, but gray, fast, an elusive movement deep in the forest. Without a second thought, Kostya stepped off the packed road into the snow and moved toward the mystery. He trudged knee-deep in snow, his eyes fixed on the flickering shadows ahead. They led him deeper, away from the village, to where ancient fir trees formed an impenetrable wall. And soon he heard sounds, not music, but a low, monotonous drone, as if dozens of voices were holding a single strange note. He emerged into a small clearing hidden deep in the thicket, and he froze, paralyzed by icy terror. In complete silence, broken only by that hypnotic hum, about 20 residents of Omut stood in a tight circle, all dressed in dark, plain clothes. In the center of the circle, on a flat, dark boulder resembling an altar, lay a dark, motionless figure, tightly bound with ropes made of bast. Around the stone, on the white snow, dark, almost black droplets and stains stood out sharply. The air was heavy and thick, strangely mingling the smells of smoke, bitter herbs, and something coppery, cloyingly sweet, the scent of death. But the most terrifying thing was happening around and above the boulder. The air above the stone shimmered and melted, like over a hot skillet. In this haze, shadows woven from nothingness coalesced and dissolved outlines of giant horns, clawed paws, eyes burning with a cold green light. It seemed as if the darkness itself was coming alive and reaching for the altar. Around the people, at the very edge of the circle, ghostly sprouts broke through the snow and instantly froze in the frost blue, translucent stems with black buds that slowly turned toward the moon. And from the bodies of the ritual participants, pale threads of light stretched toward the center, weaving into the shimmering haze above the altar, feeding it. At the head of the circle, standing with his back to Kostya, was a tall figure in a long, dark robe with a hood. The robed figure's arms were raised to the moon, and from his fingers emanated the same ghostly light. The people in the circle swayed in time with their droning. Some beat simple skin-covered drums. Others dragged sticks along the notched edges of wooden objects, producing a grating sound. This was no celebration. This was an ancient ritual, its power visible to the naked eye. This was magic, real and terrifying. Pure animal horror struck Kostya in the chest. Instinctively, very slowly, trying not to make a sound, he began to back away, wanting only one thing: to run, to hide, to not see this. His gaze was glued to the witchcraft unfolding before him. Not watching his feet, backing through the snow, his foot found emptiness under the crust. There was a quiet crunch. The snow gave way, and with a short, stifled cry, he tumbled down into the darkness. The fall was short, but painful. He landed on his back against something soft and lay still, trying to catch his breath, his heart pounding in his throat. From above, as if from another world, the same droning continued. His fall had gone unnoticed. When his eyes adjusted to the dark, he gasped. He was sitting at the bottom of a small sinkhole, a narrow entrance to a cave, and the walls around him were covered in drawings. Scratched, painted with ochre, carved into the stone. Spirals, just like on the village houses. Stylized figures of people and animals, hunting scenes. And further in, where a narrow passage led deeper into the cave, the drawings became stranger creatures with bird heads, people with branches instead of arms, huge bear-like shadows. And everywhere that same symbol, an eye at the center of intertwined branches. But this wasn't just the history of Omut. The scenes shifted, stretching back millennia here. Primitive hunters with spears drove a mammoth, and then a ship made of ice sailed on black water, under strange stars here. Cities of crystal crumbled under the assault of giants, in ice armor creatures like trees, striding across a plain, and through it all the same symbol, the eye, observing the passage of time. The air in the cave was still and stale, smelling of damp stone, ancient dust, and something else, a faint but persistent scent of ozone and resin, like after a thunderstorm in a coniferous forest. This place breathed its own, slowed down life. The silence here was dense, saturated. He took a step deeper, running his fingers over the rough stone surface. Under his touch, the ancient symbols seemed to come alive. He imagined he heard a faint hum emanating from the very depths of the cave. The air became electrified. It seemed the darkness itself was pulsating to this inaudible rhythm. With each new image, Kostya felt something shift inside him, sprouting. It wasn't a thought, but a sensation, a deep, animal memory. He began to feel the patterns, the spiral infinity. The intertwined branches, the connection of all things. The eye awareness. He placed his palm on the last image, a giant eye. The stone under his fingers was surprisingly warm. The moment his palm touched the stone, Kostya's consciousness went dark. The world swam, shattered into pieces, and reassembled, bright, hot, cruel. He was no longer Kostya. His body was foreign, hardened in battle, covered in scars, his knees pressed against sun-scorched stone under a blazing sun. Around him, in a tight ring, stood giants of light and shadow. Not men, not gods, but powers, ancient as the stone itself. Their faces constantly shifted. The air trembled with the power emanating from them. One of the titans raised its hand. A luminary ignited within it, a clod of pure primordial life, of understanding. Accept and remember, a voice boomed, coming from the very earth, sky, and air. You are the border keeper, the guardian of the threshold. Your blood is the key. Your will is the lock. You will maintain the balance. Power flooded into him like a waterfall of fire and ice. He saw everything, the threads connecting the world, the currents of force running through the earth's veins. The secret of the universe unfolded before him. At that moment, something rough and relentless grabbed his shoulders. The vision cracked and crumbled. He was yanked so hard his shoulders nearly dislocated. Pain shot through his body. He was dragged across the uneven cave floor. The blinding light of the winter morning burst through the opening. He was thrown out and dumped onto the snow. Two men stood over him. The grim driver of the Bukanka van, his face twisted with rage, and a silent, stocky man. Their eyes were full of anger and fear. Why did you go poking around, outsider? Who gave you permission? They grabbed him again, dragged him across the clearing. Kostya saw a second boulder, hidden in the shadow of the trees. On its surface were deep indentations, like impressions from many bodies. Kostya's heart hammered wildly. He understood their intention. At that moment, Aristarch emerged from behind the trees. His face was tired and focused. "Put him down," the old man said quietly. They threw him onto the cold stone. They drew their knives. Kostya squeezed his eyes shut. But at the moment the blades were raised, the air thickened. The knives froze in place, as if hitting an invisible wall. The men's arms trembled but couldn't move. The very boulder beneath Kostya seemed to sigh, and a vibration ran across its surface. From the ancient grooves in the stone, a pale light weakly streamed forth. The light enveloped him, warm, almost alive. Everyone froze. Aristarch slowly approached. "Release him. Lower your weapons." The men recoiled. The knives clattered onto the snow. "The power, it did not reject him," Aristarch said, and his voice held reverence. It accepted him. It protected him. He turned to Kostya. "Get up, son. It seems we were blind. The taiga itself has chosen you. You are not an outsider. You are the chosen one. Aristarch helped him up. Kostya's legs were weak. The old man didn't let go of his hand. You thought you were just running away from your life, didn't you? Number. The taiga called you. It always calls those it needs. You have stepped into our history. You have touched a power older than our oldest legends. It has acknowledged you. You are a part of us now, Kostya, and you will not be able to leave. Omut will pull you back. Longing will gnaw at your heart until you return. You have many more secrets to learn, both terrible and beautiful. You will understand the price of the power that flows in these lands, and the price we pay to contain it. The old man released his hand and gave him a slight push toward the village. Go, warm up. Come to me at sunset. We must begin immediately. There's no time to waste. You have much to catch up on. Kostya stood, unable to move. He felt something click inside, like an invisible door slamming shut behind him, cutting off the path to his old life. He looked at his palm, the one that had touched the eye in the cave. It was still warm. He took his first step toward his izba, toward his new home, toward his new, incredible, and frightening fate. The path back was closed for good.